In September, Jim Johnson, special counsel to Governor Phil Murphy, released a report on Atlantic City outlining the ongoing issues and answers to a familiar question. Given its history of poverty, blight, and lack of leadership, how can Atlantic City move forward? Using the report as a guide, the Press of Atlantic City created Reinventing AC, a project to explore the proposed solutions and real obstacles to enacting the recommendations outlined in Johnson's report. Over the course of 2019, we'll try to address the complicated issues that have long kept Atlantic City from sustained success. Michelle and I were among the first group of press reporters to launch our project, looking at the city's blight. Michelle, you took a really firsthand look at this. Can you tell us a little bit about what you found?
Yeah, I was asked to do an overview and to look back at the history. And what I found was that the real turning point was in 1964 when the Democratic National Convention was held in Atlantic City. Everybody expected it to be Atlantic City's chance to shine nationally and internationally, and instead, reporters came from all over the nation and world, and they just talked about nothing but how awful the city looked, how the hotels were old, dingy, didn't have air conditioning, how the business district was terrible, and living conditions for people were terrible because of urban blight. And it really backfired on everybody.
It was a turning point for the city, but
yeah,
not much has really changed since then.
In some ways, there are still many problems with blight, but in some ways, a lot has actually changed. For example, it took more than 20 years into casino gaming for the city to create what's called the Walk. It's a beautiful, brand new shopping area right at the foot of the Atlantic City Expressway. So most people who come into town come in on this major artery, and they come right through this beautiful shopping area. But about 10, 15 years ago, that was an eyesore, a terrible eyesore. It was a very old, low-income housing project that had not been well maintained. So that's no longer there, you know. But now people come off the expressway, and one of the first things they see after the Walk is the closed Trump Plaza, which is a different kind of blight now, an empty casino.
And it's one that developers coming into Atlantic City reference frequently when they say,
yes,
what needs to change about the image of Atlantic City? Almost inevitably, Trump Plaza is one of the first things they talk about.
Yeah, and you looked at a very specific part of blight, which is rooming houses, right?
Sure.
I thought it was fascinating. Can you describe a little bit about what rooming houses are in Atlantic City?
Rooming houses have a deep history in Atlantic City. You know, they used to be places where people would come on their vacations and they'd have great memorable times spending time at these rooming houses that were operated by, you know, a husband and wife or a family, and
kind of a beautiful home, right? Their home, and they shared it with others.
Very similar, almost like a bed and breakfast kind of idea, right? Well, now they've become a last stop for those who are struggling to make ends meet and don't have anywhere else to go. It's kind of that intermediary between being homeless and having your own place. You live in a rooming house. The problem in Atlantic City is they're clustered together, specifically in the tourism district.
Often on beach blocks, right?
Correct, correct. Right now, there's a focus on what's called the Orange Loop, named after the Monopoly pieces, which is Tennessee Avenue, St. James Place, and New York Avenue. And on those 3 blocks alone, there's over a dozen rooming houses. Wow. And it's very hard to entice investors to come into the city and want those beach block properties when they're right next to rooming houses.
And these, I think you found that these rooming houses end up attracting sort of maybe a criminal element. They end up calling the police a lot, right?
Sure. And you know, that's no way to paint everybody with a broad brush, but there certainly is a devotion of resources in Atlantic City to the rooming houses. Yeah. During our research and working in concert with the Atlantic City Police Department, we actually found that the department responded to over 800 calls for service to the rooming houses in 2018.
And so here, like the cop cars are coming up here, and these houses are not that far from casinos, right? And tourists are seeing this. Yeah, that's got to be a problem.
So there's an effort now to kind of clean up the image of Atlantic City. And you and I, as well as our colleague Avalon Zoppo, we were fortunate enough to go to a city in New Jersey that's been successful in rehabilitating not just its image, but the actual city itself. We went to Asbury Park.
Right.
And we're using that sort of as a model to identify areas that Atlantic City could or maybe should be focusing on. Can you tell me a little bit about what you found when you went to Asbury Park?
Yeah, I found it was, I came home very optimistic because I remember Asbury Park when it was a blighted mess. And you go up there now, and the business section, which I concentrated on, Cookman Avenue, is now virtually completely rehabilitated. They kept the old buildings. They just have put a lot of money into renovating them. It's gorgeous. There's art galleries, restaurants, boutiques,
But more than anything,
theaters.
a sense of optimism from the people who are there.
Oh yeah. Actually, people are now saying it's almost too successful. You know, it's now hard for average income people to afford a home there and to afford the rent to have a business there. So it has really been super successful, and it's another shore town. It's another town that had a huge mountain decline, really.
And you and I and Avalon, we each went on separate days, and we focused on different areas of the city. So you focused on Cookman, which is sort of their business district,
Right.
and I know Avalon spent a lot of time on the boardwalk. I ended up going to what it could only colloquially be referred to as the wrong side of the tracks.
Right.
Asbury Park, literally the train tracks cut through the center of town. And on the east side is the boardwalk and the business district, and on the west side is where the impoverished and the less fortunate have usually lived in Asbury Park. And I want to say I left with the same sense of optimism, because there is a devotion on the west side of Asbury Park to building up their blighted areas and turning them into affordable housing and more welcoming areas for those who may not have the financial resources to live in the better parts of town. So I certainly think that that's an example and a model that Atlantic City needs to look at. We hear a lot from officials in Atlantic City that there's not enough housing for them. And it seems to be that some of the blight that we saw and that we looked at are these old houses that maybe either need to be rehabilitated or just torn down, and something else needs to go in its place.
Yeah, absolutely. And in Asbury, I know it is a smaller place. I just wanted to point out it's maybe not a total comparison. It's smaller. Their problems overall might have been a little smaller than Atlantic City's, but they have a lot to teach us.
And that's the important part of this project, and we certainly don't want anyone to think that we're just focusing on the negatives in Atlantic City.
Right.
The real crux of this project is us finding solutions and finding the way forward so that we can make Atlantic City a better place for everyone. So if you want to find out more about our Reinventing Atlantic City project, please visit our website. You can check out the pressofAtlanticCity.com or go to reinventingac.com.